It's that time of year when people become obsessed with setting goals and New Year's resolutions. Alongside losing weight and maybe saving some money, one of the most common New Year's resolutions is to read more books. And for most people, this is a really good resolution. After all, generally speaking, the more you read, the more you learn. But that's not actually always true. And I think if you're someone that watches my videos, this might not be a good goal for you. In fact, if you're a theology nerd like me, you might actually need to read less books. Now, this isn't because reading is bad, and in this video at least, I'm not going to be advocating for kind of learning outside of reading, but I want us to return to that premise that I introduced earlier, that reading more means you learn more. In fact, that's not always quite the case. You see, if we were to graph reading and learning, we might expect that the two lines would go together, that the more you read, the more you learn. But I think if we did graph it, what we'd find is something a bit more scattered. Sometimes the more you read, the more you learn, but other times you can read very little and learn a lot. There might be a slight correlation, but it's certainly not a one-to-one type of thing. Why is that? Well, there's two other factors that I think we need to consider when we're reading, and far too often, maybe people like you and people like me, we get obsessed with a topic. We begin learning about it. We read all the books we can. I mean, there's certainly plenty behind me here, right? You just go, how much can I read? How much can I ingest? But you actually hurt your learning by going too fast. And so the two things I want us to consider are the quality of our reading and also the quality of the books that we're reading. Let's start with the first one. If you've ever crammed for a class and you've skimmed through the pages right before you needed to get to class to say that you've read it, you know that not all reading is quite the same. On the one hand, you could pore over something and mark up the margins. You could really wrestle with the text. And on the other hand, you can be just flipping through the pages. It's kind of like the difference between having a real dialogue with the text where you have the author's point of view and your point of view, and you're seeing how they come together, and you're bringing your experience and the author's experience, and it's creating this really powerful learning moment, and the difference between something of a monologue that's falling on deaf ears, where the author is saying things and you're kind of passively hearing it, but you're not engaging with the ideas, and therefore you're not learning very much. And I fear that most of the time when we're reading and not taking any notes, when we're not reflecting on our reading, or we're not trying to wrestle with how does this line up with the thoughts, beliefs that I already have about this topic, but we're just kind of letting it go through us, we're not really learning. And it's why we can come to the end of reading 12, 20, 50 books in the last year and not have really moved the needle on our knowledge on many subjects. Maybe we've got a couple facts, but we haven't built a coherent structure of thought because we haven't really been doing good reading. And the second thing I'm going to look at is the quality of the books that we're reading. Now, so many of us, we read whatever's new, whatever's just come out, and that's exciting and it's fun, but we know that not all books are the same, right? Not all books have the same weight to them, and that you could read lots of bad books and not learn very much, or you could read one very good book and potentially learn a lot more. But how do we double down on these two things of reading better and reading better books? And the second one, I mean, it's very subjective in a way, right? How do we determine what's a good book? Well, I want to dive into both of those in turn here very quickly. So first, on how to read better, my number one tip for being a better reader will be to take notes as you're reading. This has been such a game changer for me. And it's not just taking notes while you're reading, like in the margins, but please, by all means, while you read, especially nonfiction, but even fiction, have a pen, mark it up, see the things that really stand out to you, reflect on it as you're going. That active process will force you to really wrestle with the text and have a better experience with it and learn more from it. But I also highly recommend taking notes afterwards, whether that's just in the front cover of the book and writing out the thesis, kind of the structure of the argument, some key points, or having a more robust system. I personally use a software called Obsidian, which is a knowledge management tool. They don't pay me for this. It's free. But if you want to check it out, you can do that. But I do that to kind of link the ideas between books and have a structure for note taking, which if you're interested in, I can share. But when you do this, it allows you to really not just begin to internalize what you read in that moment, but come back to see the connections between different books and begin to kind of have a process for maintaining your knowledge and updating it, helping it grow in a more systematic way. It will really help you. And the second thing for reading better is to read in community. Now, when you're reading with others, if you've ever been part of a book club, you've probably had the experience of saying, whoa, I never would have seen that on my own after someone shared their perspective on the text. But after hearing it, you begin to see the text in a new way. You begin to have a deeper understanding of it. This only really happens at its best when we read with other people. If good reading is a dialogue and not a monologue, a dialogue between you and the author, great reading would be a conversation in community. The author, then a multiplicity of perspectives that allows you to grow and learn and refine your thinking as iron sharpens iron in that moment. Quick shameless plug. That's why I love doing Gospel Simplicity Inside Circle, the Gospel Simplicity book club, so much. You get to read great books with people from across the world who are curious and hungry to learn more. We read patristic texts together with Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, and together we learn so much more than we ever would alone. So if you want to join that, you can do so by going to patreon.com/gospelsimplicity, sign up at any tier, and you will have access to the book club. Plug over. And then on our second point, how do we improve the quality of books we read? And let's pause for a moment to talk about what makes a quality book. You could have a quality book in terms of the prose is really beautiful. You could have a book that really resonates with you on a deep level, or a book that taps into some universal theme that maybe makes you want to strive towards some type of good. Now, you could also map this onto like the transcendentals, right? Of beauty, truth, and goodness of a beautiful book, a true book that reveals something about the nature of mankind or the nature of the universe in a way that you didn't realize before, in a way that's more concise or more poignant. Or you could have a book that taps into some ideal, right? That shows goodness and makes you want to strive towards it, and seeing kind of like the honor in a character makes you want to be more like that. And of course, all three of these can be present in nonfiction or fiction. And kind of good books, I would say, are fiction, nonfiction agnostic. It can be either way. But how do you go about picking better books then? If part of what you want to do is read higher quality books, how do you know which ones are good? Because frankly, there's a lot of bad books out there, but there's also a lot of great ones. So how do we sift the wheat from the tares here? Well, one of the recommendations, and not to sound too antiquarian or pretentious, but is to read old books. Now, is this because all the old things are better in the new ways? The kids these days, they're just not as good. Like, we don't make them like we used to. No. That's not the case. And it's sometimes a silly opinion that people begin to take after they read a couple old books. It's not that old things are inherently better. It's simply that the old books that are still around today have passed the test of time and have a higher likelihood of tapping into some of those transcendentals. Think about like a Barnes & Noble today. I love the Barnes & Noble near my house. It's my favorite one. If I walk in there, there's thousands of books, most of them having been released in probably the last decade, if not the last couple years. And I would then ask you to think of those thousands of books. How many are going to be around in 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years? Not very many in all likelihood. The ones that are much more likely to be quality books. Now, is it possible that many good books are somehow lost in the cracks of time? Of course. Is it also possible that somehow a kind of mediocre book ends up withstanding the test of time, and in 100 years people are reading a bad book from today? It's possible. But generally the books that stay have a power to really connect into one, if not all of those transcendentals, and people keep reading them because of that. And so if you kind of want a shortcut to finding good books, well, find the ones that have already withstood the test of time. Now, there's a second way to find good books that admittedly applies a bit more to nonfiction than fiction, but there is a parallel there. And that is to simply follow the footnotes. Early in my academic journey, I found that if you kept reading books on a given topic, you would see that all of these different authors are citing a few of the same works. And whether that's in philosophy, and you have some of these monumental like continental philosophers, or going back further and you see they're all kind of riffing on Plato and Aristotle or Aquinas, well, at some point what you want to do is follow where the footnotes lead. And that could be a rather new book as well. It could be that it's just such a landmark study that everyone's footnoting it, right? But if you follow that, you'll begin to get to the source, and that's where the real meaty conversations and learning can happen. Rather than reading 100 secondary sources, all kind of in conversation with this one thing that you don't know that much about because you haven't read it, read the source, and then maybe wade into the secondary material. Now, again, this is easier in nonfiction, but there is something similar in fiction. What you'll find is that in fiction, so many authors are riffing on kind of previous literary motifs or even previous works. I mean, today there's a whole cottage industry, right, of books written about Greek gods and these ancient stories. I mean, how many times has kind of Odysseus' story been rewritten, right? Or you have all of these things that, well, you can just go back and read the original stories that have kind of had this second life and third and fourth and so on and so forth through these other books that retell the stories. And chances are that these older stories tap into something even deeper and more true. They kind of get to terra firma in a quicker way. And in doing that, maybe you can develop a better taste for fiction and to read more quality books. And of course, a quality book to you could be different than a quality book to me. But as unique as we all are, we're pretty similar. And so if lots of people have found a book to be good, it doesn't mean the book is good, but there's probably a higher likelihood that you will too. And so by either following the footnotes, by reading the classics, or just seeing the works that other authors are riffing off of, is a way to kind of find better books. So there you have it. Those are 2 ways that you can become a better reader. And now you might say, what does this have to do with reading less? Well, I hope at this point it's fairly clear that doing this will take time. If you want to read well, you're going to have to read a bit slower. If you want to read quality books, they're often a bit harder books, so you won't read as many of them. But if in 2024 or whatever year you're listening to this or watching this, you are tempted to make a commitment to read more, but you're already reading a ton, I'd encourage you, maybe read a little less, but read better and read better books. I think you'll find that it really pays off. Well, anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. And as I said, this isn't to say that there aren't other ways of learning more by reading less. In fact, many of you who watch this would do well to maybe engage in some of the other forms of learning, some of the more experiential ones, right? Some of those embodied ones. But if you're looking to read, here are some tips for reading better and reading better books. I'd be curious, what are the best books that you're reading lately and how have you learned to be a better reader? Please let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoy videos like this that are slightly off topic from theology, but hopefully will make you a better theologian, well then let me know. I enjoy making them, and so I'm happy to do more. In any case, until next time, be on the lookout for more videos. And as always, go out and love God and love others, because truly, above all else, that will change the world.